Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you have joined from. I'm pretty excited today with another webinar from Data Platform Geeks, and it has been a roller coaster ride. Since last few months, we are continuously doing webinars every Tuesday and every Thursday. And big thanks to Microsoft, all the MVPs worldwide, my colleagues Satya, Ramesh, and Aarti, they have been tremendous in supporting us with these webinars. So great. Today's webinar is about turn runbooks into notebooks, handling maintenance and emergencies with Azure Data Studio. And the speaker for today is one of your favorites, Matt Gordon. He is the data platform MVP from USA. I will be your host for the next few minutes. And thanks again to our moderators, Satya and Aarti. Before we hand over to Matt, just a quick word about SQL Server Geeks and Data Platform Geeks. These are the two communities that we work with. And Data Platform Summit is a very large conference that we organize every year in the month of August, September, or October during that quarter. This year is the 6th year for this conference, and this is the place where all of you should join if you really want to connect with international experts, including Microsoft product team members. Data Platform Geeks and SQL Server Geeks are two separate websites. We have membership with Data Platform Geeks, and SQL Server Geeks is just a place where you can see a lot of videos and blogs. Just before beginning the webinar, I was talking about a lot of social media channels in LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram. You can get access to all of them using that short bit.ly link, bit.ly/DPG social. So just bookmark that, go ahead and subscribe to wherever you feel comfortable. A word about Data Platform Summit. As I said, this is the 6th year, and on the right-hand side, you can see all the 5 years of the conference and the theme on the right side. And this is a conference where data analytics and AI professionals join us from more than 16 countries. And last year was tremendous. And as we say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. You can see all our delegates in this group picture, all our speakers, and our Microsoft keynote speakers, Gail Shepard, also from Redmond. So this is one place where all of us come together, learn, share knowledge, and network with each other. Of course, the biggest USP is learning from our peers, the community, and interacting with Microsoft engineers who directly fly in from Redmond. So all in all, a great 3-day conference and multiple days of pre-con full-day classes to join. So watch out for Data Platform Summit 2020 news and announcement coming soon. The website dps10.com is the place where you should go. And of course, you can also join the Telegram channel if you want to know more about DPS announcements. A big thanks to Data Platform Geeks core team. Apart from myself, we have Manohar, Avanish, both the Vijays from Hyderabad, Anupama from Australia, Sandeep, Prince, Surbhi, Sakaram, and Devnath. They have relentlessly supported our community activities and voluntarily have come forward to help us grow the community. Apart from Data Platform Geeks team members, I'm very well supported by our eDominer teams across Bangalore and Calcutta. These are the two places I keep flying in between and just try to do as much community work as I can. So big thanks to my team out there. Special thanks to Microsoft. Microsoft is one company that really understands community so well, and they have recognized us and supported us in our efforts. Knowledge partners for today is SQL Maestros. SQLmaestros.com is the place where you should go, and you will see a lot of learning resources out there, more specifically the hands-on labs. SQL Maestros just last month changed the subscription model for their hands-on labs. And now if you buy a hands-on lab, you can keep it for life. And that's a great change we have done for the community. Also, SQL Maestros is coming up with multiple video courses in the month of March. So visit SQLmaestros.com to learn more on what it has to offer. All of you are member of Data Platform Geeks now. You know that we do a lot of webinars and events, and you might have been part of these events in past also. But if you go to dataplatformgeeks.com and log in with your credentials, you can see a lot of recorded webinars, SQL videos, and more learning resources. Sometimes there are a lot of hands-on labs also available. So continue to remain members of dataplatformgeeks.com and enjoy all the learning resources absolutely free for the community. If you have questions, again, I would invite you to go to bit.ly/DPG social, where you will be able to get all the links. So use whichever channel you prefer. Most of our speakers are available on most channels. And even if they are not, to get your question answered, we will ensure that they come online and they help out with the answer. With this, over to the speaker, Matt. Welcome again and welcome back to Data Platform Geeks webinar. Great to host you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Actually, it looks like I think you have to turn the sharing over to me.
Is Matt, so you can go ahead and share?
Yeah, it says I cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing. So I think when you stop yours, it will allow me to start mine.
Okay, I'll just do that.
All right, that should have done the trick. Let's see. Let me know when you can share my screen, and I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, mine says it's sharing. Can you see me?
Yes, very much.
Okay, excellent. All right, we'll dive right into it here. I think we've got about 50 minutes left. So, thanks for coming. It's quite early for me here in the States. I'm in the Eastern time zone, so it's about 4:30 a.m. So apologies for the slightly scratchy voice, but let's get started. So this is a little bit more about me. I work for Insight DI. You can find me online pretty much anywhere as SQL at Speed. My blog is sqlatspeed.com. A little bit more about me here. And what I want to call your attention to on this slide is actually the last point. So whether you're involved with data platform geeks, past events, whatever, we're very fortunate to work on technology where the community is very open. There's lots and lots of free resources to improve any of our data platform skill sets, including venues like this. So definitely continue to take advantage of all this stuff. And more importantly, be involved however you can, whether that's speaking, whether that's volunteering at events, any of those sorts of things. These are pretty easy ways for us to keep our skills sharp and also make friends and network and things like that. So again, thanks for coming. As I said, I am SQL at Speed online, and while I'd like you to reach out to me, that's also a really good excuse to show this slide. So occasionally, when time and schedule allow, I get to drive some of these race cars. So if you're not interested in Azure Data Studio at all, but you do like motor racing, feel free to chat with me online about that. As I mentioned, I'm from the States. I live there in the red state, and for most of you, I'm probably about 9,000 miles away. But what's cool is we can all hang out here and chat and learn something we may or may not know. So let's dive into that. So what I hope you get out of this talk is though I'm a consultant now and I do a lot of different things, I spent many years as an operational DBA. So I was handling a lot of on-call things, designing processes to manage those things and hopefully execute them in the ways that they're supposed to be. I didn't have Azure Data Studio at that point in time, but as Microsoft has put more and more investment into this, it's occurred to me there are some ways where this could have helped me quite a bit. So what I did is I put together this session to hopefully help you to see how a tool that's generally regarded as a development tool may actually be able to help us as DBAs handle our maintenance and emergencies and things like that in a more useful and organized way. So we're going to talk about what Azure Data Studio is and kind of why it exists. And we're going to talk about Runbooks. And then we're going to talk about how to turn those into notebooks, what notebooks are, how we can make them. And then I'm going to show you some samples that are not probably the kind of emergency incidents you're going to respond to all the time. But hopefully what it does is plant that seed for you that you can see, here's how I can use this where I work. I see what these things can do. I now know how to make them. And I'm going to go back and share this knowledge with the rest of my team. So let's dive into the what and why. So what is it? Some of you may recall about 1.5 years ago, something called SQL Operations Studio went GA. What was odd about that is you'll still see people on the SQL help hashtag and things like that ask about what happened to this. They're like, oh, I really like SQL Operations Studio. Why don't they have it anymore? Well, they do, but when it went GA, they changed the name, and it became known as Azure Data Studio. Now, what's frustrating for those of us who think this is a pretty cool tool is it seems like the marketing folks won out in naming this. So by the name, one might naturally assume that it's only for Azure because it has Azure right there in its name. It's not only for Azure, despite what it's called. Microsoft is not good at naming things sometimes, and this is certainly a case where I would say maybe they got it a little bit wrong. So Azure Data Studio, while it can certainly connect to Azure and your database resources there, is not cloud only. So what it really is a cross-platform tool, as the quote from the site says, using the Microsoft family of on-prem and cloud data platforms, and it can be run on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux as well. And the experience is pretty much the same across those three. I'll be doing my demos in Windows today. So what I'm going to show you obviously is tailored to the notebook experience. You're not only wedded to the Microsoft family of databases when you're using this as well. So there is an extension, and we'll talk about what those are in a couple minutes, that you can install to operate against your Postgres resources out in Azure as well. So if you're in a shop like many of us are, where we've probably got a little bit of SQL Server, a little bit of Azure SQL, and just kind of odds and ends, we can connect to Postgres and a few other platforms through extensions that we would install into Azure Data Studio. And in a couple slides, I'll show you kind of what that looks like and what those are. So why would I use this? The first question I get pretty much every time I give this session, and I'll say if you have any questions as we go ahead and throw those into the chat pane, and we'll handle those at the end, and any we don't have time to get to, I'm more than happy to blog about them. So the first question I get is, okay, so there's Azure Data Studio. I see why it's cool. I see how it's useful. Does that mean I don't need to use SSMS anymore? No, that's not true. I think what the Microsoft folks would want me to say here is they are complementary tools. But what I will say is this: for me, if you're doing purely database development, so perhaps fewer admin tasks, more development, the development experience is certainly purer there. The way I've heard it described, and you'll kind of see when I show it to you as well. If you're familiar with Visual Studio Code, it's basically that for a database dev. So it is tailored to that development experience. That said, we're here talking about, as a group of DBAs, how we might use it. So you can do a lot of your kind of day-to-day DBA tasks with it. Out of the box, it is a bit limited in what you can do. But I can show you a few things that that I think you'll like. Some kind of quick dashboards that we can do, and things like that, where you can put a lot of that administrative information at your fingertips. That might in SSMS be a little bit harder. And last but not least, I will say this. I wouldn't say this is completely inside information, but it does seem to me from the outside that the tool development investment at this point between these two tools does seem more focused on adding features and improving the experience in ADS versus Management Studio. So Management Studio is not going away, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But it does seem to me that a little more attention is being paid to Azure Data Studio. So it's a great time to get familiar with it and see how we can use it in our day-to-day tasks. And with that, let me go ahead and flip over to Azure Data Studio itself. Okay, so what we've got here is, let me show you the connection. So if you've never seen it before, and what we've got over here is the first notebook that I'll show you. But if you've never seen it before, when you open it up, you're going to see something like this. And by default, it's going to come up with a list of servers that you've connected to and try to restart those. If you have an Azure subscription, it's going to do that there. You can use it against a central management server as well. So if you use those, and a lot of times in a larger shop, those can be a real lifesaver to be able to run queries against multiple servers and things like that. You do have that ability straight out of the box to do that here. Also want to call your attention to, if you see where my mouse pointer is down here in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, something called SQL Server Big Data Clusters. This by no means is a talk about that. That honestly could be a full day session by itself. But if you're using big data clusters, so if you've got SQL Server 2019 and big data clusters are something you're exploring or something you're actually using in production, I would say the far better administrative experience is Azure Data Studio. So if that's a part of your day-to-day work, or you're learning about it, or you think you're going to have to administer one of those, learn Azure Data Studio now, because you do get some nice kind of administrative dashboards and things like that for those, where Management Studio, the support from an administrative standpoint for BDC is pretty limited, honestly. So, all right, so let's talk about extensions. So I did mention those, and let me go ahead and go down to those. So you'll see what we've got. It's going to be, when you open ADS, it's going to be kind of your last button down here, or you can hit Control-Shift-X to get to that. One thing I will say is Azure Data Studio, if you prefer an environment where it's very keyboard shortcut friendly, ADS is very much built like that. So if you prefer editors and things like that, where you can build keyboard shortcuts for all of those things, you can definitely do that here. And so what extensions are, is it's almost kind of like apps for your phone. So you can install all kinds of stuff to make your experience better. So for instance, the reason I've got central management servers, when we go back to here, you see I've got CMS there at the bottom, is because I installed the extension from Microsoft to have that. I also installed the admin pack for SQL Server, which is something that Microsoft has written that they recommend everybody install who's really doing any sort of administrative tasks on a SQL Server at all. So if you click into that, as I say, they recommend it, and what you get here is more or less a notebook that kind of explains to you what you get. So when you install the admin pack, you get access to SQL Server Agent, you get access to Profiler, import, DAC pack, things like that. So without that admin pack, you don't get those. You also have some down here, like if you're supporting managed instances, you've got a dashboard for those. Like I mentioned, if you want to work with your Postgres resources, there's a Microsoft written extension for that, PowerShell, Redgate SQL Search, Idera Performance Insights, Plan Explorer. So I'd say any tool that you're used to using from a vendor, there's a lot of development in that space as well, and they probably have an extension that's going to support and connect to that tool. So let's go back. So now that we've kind of seen what extensions are, and there's kind of like an app store for them, let's say, you can also install language packs here as well. So let's go back to the database, and let's kind of see what that means. So we're going to take a look at AdventureWorks 2017. I'm going to close this preview here. And I'm going to right click on that and go to Manage. And so let's see what that looks like. So right here, You've got a built-in search, which is really handy. Management Studio natively does not have that built-in search. If you download and install Redgate SQL Search, which you can install both in Management Studio and as an ADS extension, you get that ability. But here we've got it straight out of the box. And so we've got list of tables and all that. We've got a way to start, backup, and restore right here. We've got and so what clicking this does takes you to a link to learn about how to configure this. So what comes up. So you can do a lot of cool things. It's all customizable via a settings file, which is basically JSON. So if you wanted, to radically change your layout, you could click the link and do that here. One thing I do kind of want to call attention to is here. So I brought a data visualization into my dashboard just to show you something called Sandance. So Sandance is a fairly basic but really effective data viz engine within Azure Data Studio. And so let me kind of show you what that works. So right here, we've just got space used by tables, really just kind of more of a reference chart than anything else. So let's say I don't really care how many rows. I just want to know total space used. So you'll see, not only do we get kind of an instant data visualization of really any information we might want, it's dynamic as well. So if I want the rows back, just do that. Let's say it's showing pages, I don't really care about that. It takes that away. So that stuff's pretty cool. I want to show you the agent dashboard as well, and I really only want to call your attention to one thing. So this is kind of the SQL Server agent stuff we know and love. You can create a new job here. You've got kind of all your usual job properties you might want. You also have another nice piece of data visualization over here as well. So you get your 5 previous runs, and you also get a handy graph of a time comparison as well. So this is a cool way, like at a glance, especially if you're in an environment where you're running a lot of agent jobs, this could be a really cool way to go in and just kind of have that information at your fingertips to see, are we consistent with our run times? Are they what we expect? Or do we have maybe one of the last 5 runs that ran long? So I'm going to wrap up kind of this little part by showing you this. So we've gone into SQL Server Agent. We've seen here stuff we know about, just job information, exactly what we'd expect to see an agent, right? So what we do have here is something called notebook jobs. And as we walk through this later, I'll kind of show you what notebooks are and what they look like and the kinds of things they can do. And you may be like, well, this is really great, but I use SQL Server Agent for all these sorts of things, and I would prefer to use an agent job for scheduled maintenance and all that. What you can do is build a notebook and you'll have all the advantages of those that we'll talk about here in a second. You can schedule it like you would in agent. So the way you do that here is you make sure you've installed the admin pack, make sure you've installed this SQL agent extension, and then you get this, and you just open the notebook from your local path or from a UNC path as well. Tell it what database to store its information in, if it outputs any data, what database to execute it against, and then like an agent job, you give it a name, you give it an owner, you select a schedule, a short description, and it will just run, and it will execute the notebook instead of an agent job, but it executes under that SQL Server agent framework that we probably all understand fairly well. So cool stuff here. Let's get back to the slides and let's talk more about what notebooks are. And then we'll get into a bunch of demos here as well. So we talked about extensions. So what actually are they? So we saw them, but what are they under the covers? So they are VSIX files, basically Visual Studio extensions is what those are. They're wrapped a little differently in that particular view, but they're the same. Almost everything I showed you there, except for some of the vendor-specific ones, particularly tied to a paid product, they're exposed through GitHub repos. So they're open source to an extent. And I would say that goes definitely for the Microsoft ones. You can go and look at that code, and in many cases actually fork that if you want, and start to make changes as well. So much more open environment than a lot of, if you've ever tried to write anything that plugs into Management Studio, it's not super easy. So how do we install them? So I showed you what I had installed. I showed you kind of what is in the quote store, but how do I actually get those working? So within Azure Data Studio, if I had clicked the install button on one of those new ones, it downloads it, and then you'll get a little message, I think usually in the lower right corner, that says like extension installed, restart it ADS to gain functionality or something along those lines. And that's it. And you restart ADS and all of a sudden it's there. If you're not within Azure Data Studio, then you simply download the VSIX file, and then within ADS itself, there's an option in the menu to install that extension as a file. And to this last point, we already looked at some of those. So like I said, if you have your favorite add-ons from the Management Studio world, nearly all of those have been ported over. And that includes, and I get this question a lot, SQL Server or SentryOne's Plan Explorer, which hopefully everybody's using. If you're trying to parse an execution plan by hand, it's really difficult. Please don't do that. Plan Explorer is a free tool and now lives within this world as well. So that's a very DBA-friendly extension for us to have. So let's talk about our runbooks. We've talked about what Azure Data Studio is. Let's talk about how our runbooks look now and how we might want to use Azure Data Studio to implement these. So if where you work is anything like a lot of the places that I've worked, we all talk about how wonderful it would be to have very well organized runbooks. So anybody on the DBA team could execute, all manner of things. If there's an emergency or scheduled maintenance or whatever, you just say like, hey, go to here, execute this, record your results somewhere else, and that's our runbook. Unfortunately, it's rarely like that. So, do your runbooks live in SharePoint? Are they a document hidden in some SharePoint site somewhere that, you're supposed to tell the junior DBAs where to look, but you haven't yet? Are they out on a file share someplace? Is it a Word doc or a text file? Or a worst case, this would be funnier if it hadn't actually happened to me, the runbook to execute some sort of regular maintenance actually lives on somebody's local system. So it's nowhere where all of us can get to it. And that local system and the human that it belongs to is on vacation. So when something breaks and they have the recorded response on what we're supposed to do, it's on vacation with them and we don't have access to it. Odds are where you work probably has some combination of those three. They're probably not in source control anywhere. They're probably not well organized. Odds are, if they are in some sort of global SharePoint site or repository or something like that, they're probably scattered across a few. Maybe the DBA team has a wiki, maybe they don't, probably they don't. They're just kind of, they're not always easy to find, and something like this needs to be easy to find. Generally, especially if it's an emergency response runbook, you need to be able to put your fingers on it, hopefully in seconds. And certainly you don't have time to bounce around a bunch of websites and try to remember where it was the last time you used it. So what formats are we using to store these? I already kind of mentioned those, but odds are they're Microsoft Word or they're just a plain text file. Somebody whipped up something in Notepad. It might be a SQL script with some comments in it. But again, probably not an organized format here, and certainly nothing that lends itself to finding quickly and being executed quickly as well. Another challenge with runbooks, especially where I've worked, is generally you have to share the results of those. And sometimes it's both pre and post incident. But what I'm going to focus on here is post incident. So usually, especially if it's a regular process, the DBA executing the runbook probably has to record the results of the scripts that they're running. And somewhere in the runbook, it says, take a screenshot of the results and send it to this person, or take a screenshot of the results, create a Word document, copy and paste all those screenshots into the Word document, and then file it away on SharePoint or email it to the team or email it to the operations manager. Again, multiple steps, pretty clumsy. And unfortunately, it seems like most of these things don't break at a they never break during the day. So you're always waking up and trying to handle this. So you don't want any of this process to be complicated at all. A lot of us are not at our best if it's the middle of the night and our phone has rang and that's what got us out of bed. You're not at your sharpest. And so this all needs to be a cohesive process where you kind of have a one-stop shop. Somebody can see the scripts, execute the scripts, record their results without having to have multiple applications open and doing a whole bunch of things. They should just be able to open something, run it, store the results, save all of that, and then they can go back to sleep. That's really what we're after. So what should be in there? Step-by-step directions for sure. What you'd hope, and the way when I wrote these, the way I always tried to write them is you're not writing it for somebody who's not a DBA at all, because odds are, so even in the smallest office that I've ever worked in, folks with no DBA experience or no data experience at all, hopefully they shouldn't, they should not have permissions to go and do these sorts of things. So you're not writing a run book for somebody who's never done this stuff, but you are writing your run book for a DBA that is fairly junior, because your hope would be, as your company and team scale, that a lot of the overnight stuff generally is handled by the more junior people on the team. Because you don't want your best, most senior people waking up all the time in the middle of the night to fix stuff, because what happens is those best and most senior people eventually go find a job where they don't have to do that. So you want to write the run book so the least experienced person on the team can run it successfully. So you've got those step-by-step instructions for what they need to do. You probably have a series of scripts in there as well, to fail over the always-on AG, run this script and then take the results of that script and paste it over here, and off it goes. And you also want to tell them what the intended results of the scripts are, so they know if the maintenance or emergency response or whatever did what it was supposed to do. So you don't want them to have to figure that out. You want to specify in your run book, run the failover script, and then the results pane should say, blah, 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 blah. And if it says that, then you successfully failed it over. Something like that. Long story short, you want to make sure the run book contains everything somebody would need to either execute the regular maintenance or execute the emergency response that they're supposed to. As we've noted, it can be really hard to find things at 3 a.m. when your phone rings. You don't want the first part of the process to be connect to 4 different websites, download the run book from one place, download the scripts from another place, maybe source control, maybe not. You want all that centralized. And last but not least, what's the process for keeping your run books up to date? And I've seen this done a couple of different ways. So a lot of times what happens is, especially in a shop where maybe you're kind of in the early stages of maturity as a company and a team, you may not have run books as much as you might have like a business continuity plan. And generally that's been created by non-technical people, because it's probably to specify like a contract requirement or something like that, where a customer says, we need to see what your business continuity plan is. So you have to document some processes in there to say, yes, we have an always on AG and we execute failovers so many times each year for testing and all those sorts of things. But a technical person probably didn't write that. Hopefully the non-technical people that did consulted with the technical people, but even that doesn't always happen. So think about what your processes are for keeping your run books up to date. Ensure they're maintained by a technical person, because what you don't want is to tell somebody, well, here's the document you follow when something breaks. And what they're following is a business continuity plan that was really written to satisfy a customer. It doesn't have those detailed step-by-step instructions that we talked about. It probably doesn't even have what the intended results are. It may not contain scripts. That's not going to be the document that the emergency responder needs. So make sure it's maintained by technical people and then it's stored centralized somewhere. So that's a good transition to talk about notebooks. So notebooks really fulfill a lot of the requirements we just talked about. And they do bring all of this into kind of a central place that's pretty easy to pick up and go with. So what are these things? If you've never heard of them, what the notebooks within Azure Data Studio are essentially Jupyter notebooks. So that was a split off from the IPython open source project in 2014. ADS supports a number of kernels, and when we go back to Azure Data Studio, you'll see what that means. But it's basically like an execution context for the notebook. You know, what resources do I need to connect to run the scripts below me, and what language is that? So what we're going to talk about today is the SQL kernel and the PowerShell kernel, but it does do things like Spark, PySpark, things like that. So if you're connecting to, let's say, like big data resources, you can also use Azure Data Studio for that as well. And that kind of dovetails with the big data cluster stuff that we talked about earlier. So how do these differ from a script? Well, it's laid out in cells, and you'll see what that means here in just a second. So not cells like in the Microsoft Excel description, but cells, not just areas of the notebook where there's code. These cells can be text or code, and they support a fairly basic markup language for making the layout nice. And you'll see what that means. What it means is you can have something, you know, that looks a lot like a Word document, and you can have code embedded within that. And it's also a place for you to persist the results as well. So when it says like where the results of the code rendered, right in the notebook, and the results persist. So if I execute, you know, select star from the person table, and I save the notebook after I do that, those results live on there. So for something like an emergency response notebook or a maintenance thing where, let's say, we're rebuilding an index and we need to prove that it actually happened, you can execute that notebook, save it, and the next person that opens it up will see the results of the query that you ran, even though they didn't run it. So that can be very handy for something like this. That means you don't have to take a screenshot of the results pane in Management Studio and drop it in an ugly Word document to send it off to somebody. And that's probably not going to be stored in source control or something like that. It's just going to float around email. Now you have a centralized person to not only have a document that walks you through what to do. It actually has the scripts you're supposed to run and a place for those results to live on, so you can prove to whoever you need to prove that, yes, I ran the runbook and the results of everything I did are here, and you can go look at them. So basically, what are they? Scripts with pictures, more or less. And I'll show you how to include pictures into this. You do get detailed instructions. It can be very easy to follow. As I mentioned, because the scripts are run directly from the notebook, the document, even though I hate this term, can be a living document, because you'll get those results. If you're saving it after each execution, you'll see those results every time you open the notebook. And it's very handy for demos and examples, as we're about to see. So let's learn markup. So hopefully you're like, wow, yeah, this is cool, but I don't know what a notebook is. I've never seen one. What do I do? Well, now you can say you've seen one. Okay, so what we've got here, so this is, I put a whole bunch of markup examples here. So if I click outside the cell, you don't see any of the markup language at all. You just see what I want you to see. But it wouldn't be much of a demo if I didn't explain to you how this works. So let's take a look at how this works. And these are just what I think a lot of the things that you would need to create a notebook, let's say right now, and have it look decent. So if you want to do like a pull quote where you're calling somebody's attention to something, you do that kind of left caret there. So you take this, and what it comes out looking like is this in the pull quote down here. You can use pound signs to adjust headings. So you see right here, I've got biggest heading, slightly less big, a little bit smaller, smallest of headings, and I have 1 pound sign for the biggest, 4 for the smallest, and what that comes out is it looks like this here. And so if you were doing some sort of an outline, or it was like a complicated series of steps and you wanted to kind of note that, you could do that there. I will say it does seem to support down to 6 pound signs for actually the very smallest. And that does evolve. One thing you'll notice as you start to use Azure Data Studio is it is a very agile team. They push upgrades a lot. In fact, mine's sitting here waiting on one, but I did not want to tempt any of the demos by installing that last night. So yeah, it may be that they support 7 now, and this stuff changes pretty fast. So how do I make text bold? What you'll see there is 2 asterisks on each side, and what it comes out is bold text, just like you'd expect. How do I make text italic? So what that is actually 1 asterisk on each side, and I have italicized text. What if I want it italicized and bold? So we've got 3 asterisks to each side, and it comes out looking like this. So what if I want to, so that's all handy, and that's where we can kind of make it look like a Word document that we know and love, right? But we may want to have links within our notebooks. Maybe we want images in there. Well, instead of saying the screen should look like this and then writing a paragraph on what it should look like, you just put a screenshot in there. So the screen should look like this. Or maybe we want to link to somebody's blog or something like that. Say, well, if you're confused or if this fails or whatever, here's a link to a support page that tells you what it should do, or some ways to fix it, or something like that. So how would a link work? So what we've got here is a pull quote, and I've decided not to link to anything useful, but to link to a video of me racing. And so when I click this link, it's going to go, and this is important here. So these links, you'll notice I have this notebook marked not trusted. And I don't have any trusted domains configured either. So it is, though you do have to be cognizant of security as you set these up, but it will try to save you from yourself. So you could embed a malicious link into a notebook, but it's at least gonna pull up the text of that link and say, are you sure you want me to open this? And you can also configure a trusted domains list where, let's say, if you were always sending them to docs.microsoft.com, or if I was always sending you to my blog at sqlatspeed.com, something like that, you could configure that trusted domain list, and it's not going to prompt you here. So as always, security is important. They do take some steps to kind of help you out here. So if you click open, so we've gone external here, and there you go, and that's me. But you didn't come to see that. So that's how links work. Let's look at lists. So a lot of times we might want to follow steps, right? Step 1, 2, and 3. So let's look at what's basically a not ordered list. So right here you see I've got -I start a list, -I end a list. So what does that look like in the notebook? Looks like exactly that, except it's bullet points. How do I make a numbered list? That's a lot of what we're going to be doing in here. So I'll kind of work backwards from here. So we have this list, an ordered list. It says, I'm number 1, I'm number 2, I think, and you'll see why it says that here in a second, and I'm definitely number 3. So, but what do we have here? So we have number 1, which is number 1, but we have a number 4, and that's why it says I'm number 2, I think, and then we go to 3 like we'd expect. So these ordered lists, numbered lists, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. So that can be a bit confusing if you're actually looking at the markup itself. You would look at this and expect 1, 4, 3, but you don't get that. So it sees the 1, it kind of sees the layout of this list, number, period, text, number, period, text. And that it outsmarts you and says, well, this is a numbered list. And even if they put a 4 where I think there's supposed to be a 2, I'm just going to put a 2 there. So that's something to be aware of as you lay these out. So how can we link to images within here? So we have this image off my blog. And this statement right here is how we do that. So we have an image tag, we have a link, and this could be an external link, internal network, something like that. Remember, if it's on the local file system, though, as this is passed around throughout the organization, you wouldn't have access to it. So do make sure it's at a spot where it's available to everybody. So I have this link to the image from my blog, and there it is. So that's, again, just right in line notebook. I've got some text, image there. Last but not least, so we've talked about all this stuff and kind of the serious things we can do with it. I got a question once upon a time and said, can I have a GIF? Can I maybe inject some humor into my runbooks? You can. So that image tag you'll see is exactly like the one I used to show you the static image. It just links out to a GIF. And if you want to see a dog on a skateboard, there you go. So you can kind of see it's pretty easy to lay these out. And while this is an ugly document, it does show you everything that, or just what I think everything you'll need to make a notebook that's readable. So let's flip back to the slides for just a second and talk about what we can do with these, and then start wrapping this up with some hopefully helpful demos. So what can we do with these? So I talked about emergencies and maintenance in the title, right? So maintenance notebooks. Again, this is a simple example. We've talked about how these can be scheduled as well, and I wanted to show you that up front to kind of plant this seed, because I know a lot of us probably are rebuilding indexes or doing any manner of maintenance via SQL agent jobs. And when I first started playing with this stuff, they didn't have the notebook scheduling functionality with an agent. So its utility was somewhat limited. So I was not presenting a session at that point in time because I couldn't give you a way to schedule these. So it was just kind of more of a toy than anything else. Now that we have the ability to schedule these, it's not a toy. And so let's look at this example that rebuilds indexes. So back to Azure Data Studio. Get rid of our markup notebook. And so what we have is this. And so you'll see if I double click on this, I've got some markup back here. And it says, please follow these steps to execute this rebuild script. So we talked about kernels. So let me show you here. Here's the kernels that it supports natively. So you can run SQL, PySpark, Spark Scala, Spark R, Python 3, and PowerShell. Like I said, we're going to focus on SQL and PowerShell here in the next 10 minutes. So what's my step? I select my connection above, next to attach to, and I really only have one, but if you had a number of connections here, you'd see that list. Or if you wanted to create a new one, you want to connect to a database you've never connected to within Azure Data Studio, you can do that here. But we're going to attach to the default instance. We're going to execute the T-SQL cell below. So what I did here is, so you see, and you've probably seen this pop up as I've started showing this to you, when you move outside of a cell, so this is a cell here, this is a cell here, you tell it, okay, I'm going to add some text, which is markup, or I'm going to add some code, which is code in the language of the kernel. So here's some T-SQL here that just rebuilds some indexes on the AK employee table within AdventureWorks 2017. And so we've got execute this cell. So off to step 2 I go, and let me run it. And you'll see down here below the cell, it all said rebuilt. It ran in less than a second. And then you'll note I've got just a black dot here. What that means in ADS is the notebook is not saved. So it understands that something's changed. I ran this, and now I have these results down here. And this is where I said if you want those results to persist, then you would simply save this. So Control S, the black dot changes to an X, which means there's nothing unsaved here. And I'm not going to walk you through how to send an email. I suspect we all know how to do that. But I could then locate this notebook on my local system and send it to, let's say, my boss and say, you said I had to rebuild these indexes. You said to use this notebook. I did. And here's the proof down here that I actually did that. So again, fairly simple. But anything you're doing in a SQL Server agent job with T-SQL could be done here. And you have, obviously the nice kind of markup and design around it. So somebody can execute this. And then you have persisted results as well without having to take up database space of logging those results or something like that. You've got it right here. And let's say your boss isn't technical at all. They're going to be able to read this and understand that it worked, where they may not be able to go into like a logging database from agent to figure out what happened. So what else can we do with this? So, and this demo comes from a real story. So I had a manager in the past that was very confident of their abilities in the database realm because they had been an application dev. Not a lot of work with databases, but they were very confident that they could write a query, and they needed all the access to prod because they needed to query live data as it happened for some reports that they were putting together for something. And because of all their experience, they were not going to damage or harm production in any way. You probably see where this story is going. One day they executed a query within a transaction and never closed the transaction. And so we had something on production locking some significant tables because there was a transaction that's hung open. So maybe a bit of a silly example, but something that's actually happened to me. That this is an example of kind of an emergency runbook, because what happened is this was actually a recurring issue with this person for a while. So we did build some scripts around, okay, if you're the junior DBA on call at lunch and this happens, here's the scripts you run. So what I've done is basically kind of took that idea from my past and put it in this notebook. So let's talk about how to do that within both SQL and PowerShell. All right, so we've got our maintenance notebook out of the way. So we have, and so I've got something running here that's going to create a 30-second transaction, basically. So we're going to go ahead and connect to my local instance. We're going to create this here, and we're going to run it. So off it goes, right? So back to Azure Data Studio. So what does it say? So we know this has happened. It says execute the SP who is active cell. We get our output here. And it says browse the first column to find the offending transaction, which is here. We see the wait info is wait for, so we know that's us. It says replace the SPID parameter in the kill cell with the session ID value. So 73. Make sure I've got it done here within 30 seconds. And it completed successfully. And we'll see back here it died. So I killed this SPID. So that's, again, a simple, crude example of what you can do, but here's a notebook where I've got clear steps for somebody to run this stuff. I was able to kind of bold things to call out, take the SPID from here, put it here, execute it, and it works. So let's look at how we could do that within PowerShell as well, because if we're a DBA these days, avoiding PowerShell is harder and harder, right? And there's some very cool stuff here. So we're not going to save our changes there. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and just a brief note here, get DBA open transaction is part of the DBA tools library. DBA tools is an open source, community-driven source for, I think, over 300 PowerShell commandlets that do all sorts of cool DBA things. Very, very helpful stuff. And if you're not familiar with those, go to dbatools.io and check out the list. It's got everything from AG failovers to backups to migrations. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm using one of the simple ones here, but you can see it's not scary, right? I'm no PowerShell whiz at all, but I'm about to run a PowerShell notebook because they've made it so easy to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off here. We're going to start our open transaction once again. We're going to create the table within that scope, and we've got it there. So back I go. It says execute the first code cell. So I've done this. We get a whole bunch of PowerShell and see, aha, there it is. It says look for SPID column and copy the numeric value. So again, that's 73. It says to put it down here and run it. So I'm invoking a query against my instance. I'm killing 73. You won't get any output back here. And again, it died. So very cool stuff. Again, silly example, but ways that we could respond to an emergency with a notebook. We've got easy to follow steps here as well. One last thing. So I get a lot of questions here is, can I run PowerShell within a T-SQL notebook? So can I run both? Can I flip back and forth? So I have obviously very simple T-SQL here. Select that app version. My local machine is on 2019. I have this hyperlink here that's PowerShell. Can I run it? So I can. I'm going to go to View Terminal, and you'll get exactly what you think you would get down here. And I'm going to click this link, and it ran 2 lines of PowerShell just to basically show me a list of files that's within the temp folder. So there's a SQL notebook running in the SQL kernel, executing PowerShell via a hyperlink. All right, just a couple more slides, one last quick demo, and we'll be wrapped up. So yeah, we've looked at that there. One more thing, I think this is really cool. It's a way to automatically create incident response notebooks. This work is not my work at all. This is Rob Sewell and friends of his, so part of the dbatools.io group. They put a lot of time into this. So this is powered by DBA Tools PowerShell commandlets. The original blog post creates a notebook to execute the full list of Glenn Berry's diagnostic queries. If you don't know what those are, definitely look those up. They're a fantastic resource as well. I have the link to Rob's GitHub repo here for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you can download the notebook that I'm showing you for your own personal use. But also, please read the story behind this work. It was a group of 5 to 6 people that contributed to kind of make this happen, make this work, and thank those folks. This is really, really cool stuff. I don't want to take credit for any of it because it's not mine, but I did want to show it to you as we wrap up for the day here. Okay, so what I've got here, and this, we don't need to view our terminal anymore. So what I've got here, you don't have to understand what all this does. There's plenty of time afterwards. But I want to call your attention to something up here. So you've got a directory where the notebook is, and you have a target file name and an output location. So what does that mean? So we're going to look at this here on my personal system. So what I've done is I've put the notebook of notebooks, which is basically what we were looking at there. And then I've put sample notebooks. So I put a sample of the PowerShell notebook and of the T-SQL notebook as well. And what it's going to do is it's going to parse this folder and create me a link with a customized name and timestamp. And I will have my own versions of those notebooks tailored to my name and time. So if you have a set of emergency response notebooks that you'd want to run and you'd want that tied to that person, you have like a large team and you want to know, oh yeah, Matt ran this. This is how you do that. So we go back to here, we go ahead and run this, we take our terminal view off again. Okay, yeah, so all right, so we've run this. We'll go back to the generate notebook demo. We'll see it's 5:31 a.m. my time. We'll go back to Azure Data Studio. We'll open that file. We'll go into generate. So yeah, this is our new copy. And so what I've got here, so we see back in the Explorer link, we've got sample emergency notebook PowerShell and T-SQL as well. And so it pulled those 2 in. And so it says to use this notebook, click the run button. So, and I had already done this right before. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then, yeah, what I'll show you is, so we're going to go into output. And you see I've got these here where I have that notebook, and you can open this within Azure Data Studio and run it. I have a timestamp and I have my name. So if you want to tie those to somebody's specific response, you can. Hopefully you think this is cool. Like I said, definitely check this out. Thank these people for the time and effort that went into it. I think it's pretty exciting to have that kind of automated response there. And with that, I'm done. I do have a resource slide here at the end with more direct links to some of the work that Rob and his friends put in to do this, and also some sample notebooks from Microsoft and the Tiger team for troubleshooting and things like that. And I'll take any questions now.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm just waiting for you to stop sharing so I can share my slide this time.
All right. There you go.
Okay, I hope all of you can see the slide. And yeah, thank you once again, Matt. And Matt, this is your third or fourth or fifth webinar with us. Do you even have the count?
This is 4. So it's always fun. It is a bit early here, but it's always worth the effort. 'Cause it's a really fun group.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you for your kindness. And yes, so now going forward, if you have questions, earlier we used to give out links, but we saw people asking questions all over the place. So yeah, you can ask your questions in Telegram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever your preference is. So please join those groups, and the links again are there in this bit.ly/DPG social. And in case before we get into the Q&A mode, I will request all of you to please give your feedback. There is a link in the chat window. My colleague Satya or Aarti will put that down. So speakers getting up late in the night and delivering sessions all the way 7 seas above. So this is great, Matt. So attendees, speakers do look for comments, feedback, and a note of appreciation. So that will be great to get some words from you. The link is in the chat window there. I can see the chat window there. Yeah. So yeah, you can give your feedback and comments on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. Both the links are available. So yeah, we do really look forward to some comments. Another quick word from SQL Maestros, the knowledge partners for today's webinar. Do check out 2 quick things. One is the upcoming performance tuning video courses. So we have SQL Server Performance Tuning, T-SQL Querying and Programming, 3 video courses that are coming up in March. We wanted to put up all our content in form of video courses so that you can access them anywhere, anytime, and as many times. So this is for you to balance work and life and watch our performance tuning content at your disposal. Also, as I mentioned earlier, SQL Maestros has changed their hands-on lab model. Now, if you pick up a lab, you can keep it for life. And there are more than 125 labs in the library on SQL, Azure, Power BI, Analytics, Cosmos DB, machine learning, and a lot more. Each lab is divided into multiple exercises and step-by-step instructions. So yeah, up to you. The links are all there. And just go to sqlmaestros.com. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and stick around if you have questions. So I am going to now take questions, and I will request Matt to repeat the question and then answer it, so that when people are watching the recording of this webinar, they will know what the question was and what the answer was. So please use the Q&A panel in the toolbar. Attendees, those who have questions, use the Q&A panel. Please avoid using the chat window. I am not monitoring the chat window. I will look for questions in the Q&A panel. So there is a question from Manish. Matt, is Azure Data Studio, there is a way to connect through Azure SQL DB through service principal?
Yeah. There's not a great answer for that yet. There's some work being done around that. So the answer probably requires more time and some experimentation than we have here. So that's something I want to look into. I know it's kind of supposed to work, but it kind of has and hasn't over the months. So I'd need to dive into that and do some personal testing to give a fully confident answer.
Perfect. No worries, and I will. I guess you can come back and we can just post the question and the answer in our channels. So no worries, Matt. There, and let's see if we have more questions. You have a Matt. You get a good audience. There are no more questions. Looks like.
Hopefully, I didn't put everyone to sleep.
Of course not. We had our audience intact. Well, looks like people will go through your slides and content and maybe watch recording once, and maybe they will try a few things that you were trying to show, and probably questions will come up. And if that happens, we will notify you, Matt.
Perfect. Yeah. Like I said, Twitter, LinkedIn, email, there's a reason that I show all that. Definitely would like to keep the conversation going, and I'm happy to help.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with this, friends, Matt, the eDomino teams, Data Platform Geeks team members, and all the delegates, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. We hope to see you soon in any upcoming event and webinar. Thanks for your time and have a good day ahead.